Hello, boys and girls. I am Pastor Loos, one of the pastors at Redeemer Lutheran here in town, and I've done a couple of chapels with you in the past couple years, and I'm so glad to be doing this with you here in this way, even though we can't be together. Today, for our message, our devotional, I want you to focus on one verse. We're going to talk a little bit more, but there's really one verse that ties everything together that we're going to be talking about. And so I'm wondering if you can say it boldly with me. Here it goes. Jesus is talking to Thomas, and Thomas is who we're talking about today. And this is what Jesus says. Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. I want you to go ahead and say that with me, that last part. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. Let's do it one more time. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. We're going to talk about why that's so important in just a minute. You know, I'm wondering, would you believe me? Would you believe me if I told you that I could flip this water bottle full of water, you can see, full of water, if I told you that I could flip this water bottle upside down, no cap, and the water wouldn't come out? Would you believe me? You wouldn't believe me? Oh, I'm offended. No, I'm just kidding. Of course you wouldn't believe me. I understand that. It wouldn't make sense for me to be able to flip the water bottle over and have none of the water fall out. It just doesn't make sense. What would happen 100% of the time is you flip the water bottle over and all of the water pours out all over the place. Now, I'm going to do this here in my house. You can see my kids' wall of art behind me. Josiah, Juliet, and Serena, they have had a wonderful time making all sorts of creations, and it's all hanging up in one of our walls. Please don't tell my wife that I'm going to flip over this water bottle here inside our house, okay? She would not like that, because you know what? She's just like you. She would not believe that I could do that. So here's the story. Let's talk about Jesus and Thomas for just a little bit. Jesus had been killed. He had been crucified. He had been nailed to a cross. So there were holes in his hands, and there was a hole in his side where he was pierced with a spear. There were holes in his feet where they were nailed to the cross. Jesus' disciples had seen him die. They had seen him be crucified. And what happened was early on the third day, we heard this story just a couple weeks ago. We heard this message, this account of the women going to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body, and the stone was rolled away. The huge stone that was put in front of the tomb so that they could be sure no one would steal the body, no one would get in there. It was rolled away. And the women did not see Jesus. They saw an angel who told them that Jesus is alive, that he is risen from the dead. Amazing. How bold of those women to go to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body. In such a sad time, a time when they thought they had lost their teacher and their friend, they went to the tomb to anoint his body. They were bold. They were courageous. They went, and Jesus wasn't there. The angel said to them, "He is risen, just as he said he would be. Go and tell the disciples." So some of the women did go and tell the disciples that Jesus is alive. Mary actually stayed behind, most likely, and she actually saw Jesus alive. And then she ran to tell the disciples. Now, what amazing news! Can you remember when you might have had an amazing piece of news that you wanted to share with someone? Maybe something happened in your house. Maybe something happened in sports, on a sports team, or maybe something had happened in school, and you could not wait to tell your friends, to tell your family, to tell your grandma and grandpa, to tell your best friend about this good news. Well, that is the way that it was for these women. They wanted desperately to share the good news that Jesus is alive. So they ran and told the disciples. And the disciples were kind of like, "Oh, okay, cool." Actually, I don't know what they said. However, they were all together in an upper room one night, and they had the doors locked because they were afraid. And the only one of the group that was not there was Thomas. So all of Jesus' disciples were gathered in the room except for Thomas. I don't know what he was doing, but he was left out of this. And you know what happened? Jesus showed up in the room. He passed through the locked door and he showed up to his disciples. What a miracle. What an amazing thing. They could hardly believe it, but they were looking at their teacher, their rabbi, their leader who had just been killed, and he was alive. What a miracle. Can they believe it? You bet they did. And you know what they did? They went to their best friend. Well, one of their best friends. They went to Thomas. They went to find Thomas because you know what? He wasn't there. He didn't hear this good news that Jesus was alive. He didn't see Jesus alive. So they wanted him to know. That was so bold, so courageous, such bold friendship. So here's what I want you to think about. The women were bold and courageous by going to the tomb and then by going to tell the disciples that Jesus was alive and that Mary had seen Jesus. And then his disciples were bold in that they didn't want their friend to be left out. So they ran to find Thomas. I want you to take that as your inspiration. What are some ways, even right now, that you can be bold and you can share that Jesus is alive and that he is working in your life and in your heart and that he loves you and he will always be there for you? He is risen. What are some ways that you can share that message with other people? Family, friends, people who haven't heard about Jesus, maybe your neighbor, maybe go and check on your neighbor. We don't want anyone to be left out of this awesome celebration that Jesus is alive and he loves us and he will always watch over us and take care of us. He is alive. He is with you. So the disciples ran to find Thomas. And maybe you have ran and taken some awesome, exciting news to someone, and you've shared this news with them, and they respond by getting super excited for you, and maybe they're cheering, maybe they give you a high five or a hug. Here, virtual high five. Let's do it. Virtual pound. Bump knuckles. Well, you know what Thomas did? Maybe he hung his head. Maybe he crossed his arms. Maybe he pursed his lips and squinted his eyes. And he said, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side where the spear was, I will never believe." Can you imagine how the disciples might have felt when they heard that? And yet, it's really important. It's really important that the disciples didn't just cast Thomas aside, and Thomas himself didn't just leave the disciples behind. No. As a matter of fact, something wonderful happened 8 days later. But before we talk about that, I want to go back to this water for just a second. So here it is. This is the full water bottle with no cap. And I know that some of you, probably all of you, sat there and you said, "You know what, Pastor Ben, I don't believe you. I do not believe you. I will not believe you, not unless I see it. You cannot flip that bottle over without a lid on and keep all of the water inside the bottle." So, let's see. Look at that. Amazing. No cap. Water staying inside the bottle. And to show you, I can push this toothpick right up in. And you know what's amazing? At any moment, I could tell you to just snap your fingers and then the water will fall out. Watch this. Go ahead. Snap your fingers right now. Amazing. Full water bottle, no lid, and the water stayed in. Now, why in the world did I just do that with you? You understandably said, "Pastor Ben, I don't believe you. I don't believe that you could do that with the water bottle and have it work." And I understand that. I think there's a part of us that is all like Thomas. We are all a little bit disbelieving. It's hard to trust that Jesus is alive. It's hard to trust that Jesus is always with us. It's hard to trust that Jesus is always taking care of us. Sometimes life is scary. Sometimes life changes. Sometimes people we love or even we ourselves get sick. Maybe some of that is happening right now in your life. And it is understandable. It is understandable to sometimes say, "I'm not really sure. I need help." And I know that it says that Thomas did not believe. And he said, "Unless I put my hands my finger into the mark of the nails and put my hand into his side, I will never believe." And we call him Doubting Thomas and give him a bad rap. But I think it's kind of understandable, don't you? And actually, we could see it as courageous. Because remember what I said, the disciples did not leave Thomas behind. And Thomas did not just abandon the disciples. He stayed with them. He courageously and boldly stayed with them, even when he was having a hard time believing. And 8 days later, this is amazing. 8 days later, they're again in an upper room, in a locked room, and this time Thomas was with the disciples. So they were all together, and Jesus shows up. He comes through the door, and there is Jesus standing in front of the disciples, in front of Thomas, and he says, "Peace be with you." Thomas, he looks right at Thomas, and he says, "Thomas, see me. Put your fingers in my hands. Put your hand in my side. Do you see and can you feel the marks where the nails were? Do you see me? I am alive. I am with you. I will be with you always. I will always love you." And Thomas, I love this scene. I would like to think that Thomas reached out and gave him a hug, or maybe Jesus gave Thomas a hug, I don't know. But he says, "My Lord and my God." And then this is really important. Jesus says to him, he says, "Thomas, have you believed and you've seen me? Blessed are they who have not seen and yet believed." And you know who that is? That is each and every one of you. That is me. That is you. That is your parents. That's us. We have not seen, and yet we have believed. What Jesus was saying to Thomas was that he had everything he needed all along. He had Jesus' promise that he would rise again. And that is enough. And that's enough for us. It's enough for us to be bold in believing that Jesus is alive and knowing that he is with us and seeing him at work in our hearts and in our lives. Asking him to be a part of our lives and to help us and to guide us and to lead us. Knowing that he will always be there for us and he always loves us and forgives us. And then we can be bold, just like the disciples, just like the women, just like Thomas after this. And we can share with others just how awesome Jesus is in our life, how much he loves us and how much we love him, and how much we love other people, and we want them to know, and we do not want them to miss out. And for those times in our life when it's tough, when life is hard, when there are challenges, we can remember, blessed are they who have not seen and yet have believed. And we can say a prayer that shows up in another place in the Gospels, which is this: "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief." What a good prayer when times are tough. Would you pray it with me to close our time together? Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. And may we be bold followers and sharers of Jesus together. Remember, just like this water bottle could be flipped upside down and keep the... do you want to know how I did it? Of course you do. Apparently a good magician never reveals his secrets. Well, I guess all I'll say is I'm not a good magician, so here's my secret. I have this very thin piece of plastic that when I put it on top of the water bottle like this, hold on, let me get some water in here and show you, and I'll dry it off here in a second. But I have this very thin piece of plastic here, and when I put that on top of the water, it's like cut out just to be the exact shape of the top. and there's water in it. And then I've poked a little hole in there. And when I flip it over, what happens is there's some suction that keeps the most of the time keeps the water up into the bottle, and then I can even put the toothpick through that hole and make it look like there's no lid and I'm just putting the toothpick up there. But that's my secret. Maybe you didn't believe me, you had good reason to, but it is possible with just a little bit of trickery. And the good news is there is no trickery in Jesus' resurrection. He is truly alive. Death has been defeated. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia. What a joyous Easter season. Let's go and be bold and share Jesus with others in a bold way. God bless you. See you soon.